So I've pressed the go live button. I waited a little bit. I hope it works, and I'm gonna give it a couple of seconds until it shows up on my iPad right next to me. I really want this stream to work well. As you can see, this is my first stream in a while with my face showing. I wanted some crazy functionality where I could overlay the emoji over my face, but then I thought, hey, I'm not that ugly, right? Oh god, I'm gonna get bad comments on that one. Regardless, I hope it works. It hasn't shown up yet on my iPad, so I'm getting a little worried. That's why I was still... Okay, it now has shown up. I will not wait any longer. It seems to be working fine. I will zoom out just a little bit so that my face doesn't cover up too much here. Chrome? Yeah, Chrome is a little slow. I'm using Chrome so that none of my Safari data like overlaps with my streaming habits or anything else like that. I'm still very much an Apple user, and to anybody who is very much interested in Apple content from this channel, I've actually installed the latest version of the macOS Sonoma beta, and that now includes the presenter overlay feature. So maybe my next live stream will be featuring that. Maybe we can experiment around with all that stuff. So now that it's working, the obligatory Coke. I think I might make that a tradition for all my live streams. So, why is an Apple sheep like me, right? Self-awareness is great, awesome. No, but I know that some call people who are just in general Apple fans and appreciators automatically sheep. So why is a person like me even covering the latest foldables from Samsung? It has certainly nothing to do with the fact that by far my most popular video is my reaction to the Samsung live stream of the Galaxy S23 introduction. Certainly not. No, but seriously. The reason why I'm covering this is because I'm actually interested in that. And as many of you who follow me know, is over the years I have always had a secondary device next to my iPhone, which usually was a Samsung Galaxy device. I then gave them away for the most part because when I got the 13 Pro Max, the battery life was so great and the phone by itself was so large that it stopped really making sense for me to have yet another device in a second pocket or something like that. And just working at the hospital with scrubs, it's not like I have a ton of extra space that isn't taken up by everything else that I need. So yeah, there is nothing here that is malicious on my side. I'm not doing this to hate on Samsung, but I have to say I'm kind of not very happy with the rumors, especially in line with some of the other foldables we have recently gotten, like the Razer, the latest one. I forget the names. It's now with the Plus. And now the Pixel Fold. Again, also I thought it was a little weird for Google to just take Samsung's name, right? I know it's technically like it's a foldable, so why not call it a fold? But like, yeah, it's kind of taken, dude. Okay, I see now on my stream that my face isn't covering the entire website. That's actually quite good. So I'm using 95 Google, similarly to how I'm using 95 Mac or Mac Rumors. So this shouldn't be too unfamiliar as a type of content that I'm making. But now you can see me and you can ignore like the right part of the screen if you don't like what you see, except for the website part. Okay, so we will be getting on July 26th a new Samsung Galaxy Unpacked event, and you bet your beautiful ass I am going to be reacting live to it, and I hope you all tune into it as you did, especially for some reason people from Indonesia. I have no idea how the YouTube algorithm works, but like, yeah, that's the video that has almost 5,000 views on this channel, the only one that is even somewhere up that high range, right? So I really wanted to continue my Samsung coverage, and ironically enough, I'm now more poorly informed than I have been during the Galaxy S announcement, because I haven't been following as much tech news as I used to. So a lot of the stuff that will be coming up here will be relatively new to me, so bear with me, right? You don't have to like what I'm saying. I'm reacting pretty fresh to a lot of what we'll be seeing and reading together. And of course, you can let me know just how biased I am, that Apple is probably paying me somehow. Please, Apple, actually do it. But no, regardless, I'm interested in those devices, and I think with my opinion being that the recent foldables have been actually quite disappointing, even though the industry tries to say that they're the best ones ever. That's similar to how Apple says it's like the best iPhone ever. Like, I would hope so if you are charging the same money a year later, that I'm not getting an old piece of tech. But yeah, at some point I should be like reacting to like Pixel Fold reviews or something like that. Maybe the one from MKBHD, or even like the one from Max Tag was kind of fun, where he just bashed it. And even like Jerry Rick Everything, like destroyed it. So you see, I do follow tech news, and I have had some more time recently. But yeah, I haven't been as much read up on the Z Flip 5, the Z Fold 5, the Tab S9, and other devices that are supposed to be launching soon from Samsung. So what we are getting here are basically leaked renders, right? Oh my god. My mouse. What is my mouse doing here? This is why I should always use like an extra magic trackpad. So it's from WinFuture, and they published a large collection of renders of Samsung's upcoming flagships. They're showing all colors and all 5 devices from every angle. So okay, so we will be getting quite a few devices. That's interesting. I have a vague understanding of what devices we are supposed to get. I mean, the Galaxy Watch definitely is in need of an update, right? So none of these devices are seeing major revamps. Now, looking at that front image though of the Galaxy Flip, that's kind of wrong. Though I am an absolute hater of the Flip form factor, so you can expect like a really, really bad take here. So the only notable differences are a relocated flash. Yeah, I believe it used to be like in one line with everything else, and now it's next to the camera. So the Fold 5 is pictured in beige, black, and also a new blue option. That blue option is really nice. As somebody who has like a Pacific blue iPhone 13, this is actually a color that I like even more. So I would be getting probably that color or black. The beige is absolutely hideous in real life. However, when we look up at the front, right, we are basically greeted by the same front screen. Now, it should also be noted that the camera arrangement does look pretty similar, suggesting that there's like periscope or anything, but I will be looking at the full leaks when it comes to the specs. Beyond that, the same report also releases more image of the Galaxy Z Flip 5. And here we can see, like, can I not just open image in new tab? Okay, good. So this is how the Flip 5 is supposed to look like. It's interesting because obviously the most notable expansion to the experience here is the much larger outer screen. And the outer screen is what's supposed to be this discussion of, well, the bigger the outer screen, the less you have to open up your device. However, the problem is when those screens were really small, like on the original Flip, for example, people were saying, oh, the small outer screen helps like reduce your smartphone addiction, right? It's sort of more similar to a smartwatch than it is a phone, so you won't necessarily be gaming on it and stuff like that. The discussion has changed now. It's something that I've seen like in Mr. Mobile's latest Razer Flip or Razer foldable review. I always forget the name of it. And he said basically that he now does a much higher percentage of his phone interactions through that outer screen. By the way, if you hear some noise, that's basically my air conditioning. It's not as much hot as it's humid, so if I sweat, please forgive me. I have a towel, so it doesn't get disgusting for any of us here. But everything else seems to be, in terms of like experience, pretty much identical. So now the question is, do you really want like a flip now with a much larger screen? Now, I would say some people really like that form factor. I've primarily heard from women that I know, who I know, that they like the flip form factor because it gives them still this large phone, but they can fold it in. But then most of them also wear like skinny jeans, where actually, because it gets much thicker, they don't like how it looks there. So it's not like a slam dunk by any means. A lot of people like it for like the nostalgia aspect of like, oh, that's how like Motorola or like generally phones used to look like. I personally think this form factor is absolutely trash, but at least they're doing some interesting changes to it. I would also say with some much needed changes, given how absolutely dog shit some specs of it are. But yeah, we will get to the actual specs a little later on. So part of it here is now the hinge is supposed to be somewhat different. And when we go to this article, it's the Galaxy Z Fold 5 shows off nearly gapless hinge in real-life images, but it has no dust resistance. So this is very, very similar to how the Pixel Fold looks, which I would actually say is impressive, because the way the Pixel achieves this gapless hinge design is by putting a lot of that hinge where the screen bezel is. Well, Samsung does it only in the back. So to have like that really like full screen internal screen, whilst now offering that pretty much gapless design, I would still say there's like an extra degree maybe here, but it's hard to tell from such images. And yeah, we see here like the relocated LED flash from like being part of the camera line basically, and now just sitting next to it. Okay, so we now saw the fold, we saw the flip, and now is the Tab S9, right? The Tab S9, the S9 Plus, and the S9 Ultra. So Samsung will be launching apparently like a full lineup of tablets, which I personally enjoy. I don't like a lot of things about the Tab series. A lot of it has to do with like the aspect ratio, which I think works really great as like a video watching canvas, but really fails as like an everyday tablet. Like this 16:10 aspect ratio just doesn't work for me on a tablet. And I've actually tried it. This is not just me blindly saying, oh, Apple got it right, everybody else got it wrong. No. Back in my day, I've tried everything from like the Nexus 7 and then the larger Android tablets of the day. I went to like every convention that had like the latest tablets. Thankfully, we do have like a big expo in Berlin here for new tech. And I not once liked those super like wide tablets that basically look like a cut off laptop screen. So so this is just one criticism. We see the Tab S9 retaining the basically the back attachment for the S Pen. I still maintain the theory that the only reason why Samsung is doing it this way is so that they don't get compared to the iPad, which is weird because the Surface did it first. Now the Surface didn't do it quite as conveniently as the iPad, but I don't think that stealing that design, quote unquote, from either Apple or Microsoft would be held against Samsung. I am somebody who's very chill on like all the stealing stuff. I think back in the day when we had like legitimate question of like, did like Google execs steal ideas from Apple because Apple gave them early access to the iPhone so they could integrate Google Maps and stuff? I think that was actually important to cover. And when I think the first Android interfaces were coming out and a lot of stuff was like brazenly stolen, I think like what some Chinese companies are doing, where it's basically like one-to-one copy in certain elements, this does not make me angry in any way. Like they should have just made it like the iPad, and I think we would all be better off with that. It's interesting that they have like 2 cameras on the back. I've always said that like tablets don't need that many cameras, and I've criticized Apple for basically making their tablets more expensive by putting more unnecessary tech in it. I've never used like the ultra wide on my iPad. So it's interesting they're saying it will be using the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. I like this. And it's supposedly getting IP rating for water and dust resistance, which again is something I have repeatedly criticized on iPads. So there's still no rating of any kind for water and dust resistance. So if you ever wonder why I'm like looking to the side, this is where my iPad is. I'm checking the stream, checking if there's something new in the chat. So checking my internet connection. So I'm not completely crazy here. So we do have spec leaks here. Oh my god. So supposedly the outer screen will be 3.4 inches with a resolution at 748 by 720, so pretty much a square screen, like 1 by 1 almost. Internally, the dynamic OLED 2X panel will be coming at 6.7 inches, so that is identical. 120 Hertz, 2640 by 1080. Internally, it will have 8 gigs of RAM with either 256 or 512 gigs of storage, and the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. Now, the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 is not just interesting because it's powerful. It's the one chip where I've said since its introduction that when it comes to user experience, this is the first chip where I would say it doesn't matter, like, do you have like an Android device or an iPhone, because the speed of your operating system will depend far more on just how polished it is, how often it gets updated, how good the developers are, than the actual chip. Because those chips, the A14, the A15, the A16, the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 Plus, those are all good processors. So I think it's a little weak sauce maybe for like the highest end tablets. Certainly no competition to something like the M2, and especially like maybe we'll be getting M3 iPads in the not too distant future. So it's interesting, but it's definitely not surprising, right? So, and the 8 Gen 2 on the flip, I would also say, is very important because it's very efficient. Now, it does consume quite a lot of power and generates a lot of heat at its maximum power level, right? But when you max it out at like 90%, it gets insanely efficient in comparison to anything else in the Android space. And it can even like compete to some degree with like the A15 at least, right? Maybe not quite the A16 in terms of efficiency. So it's actually interesting because the flip it's the thinnest device, right? Because sure, while it gets like thick when it gets folded up, by itself it's pretty thin, so there isn't much room for either good cooling or for a very large battery. And in fact, I would actually say that this is pretty disappointing here, because it's still supposed to be it's rated at a 3700 milliampere hour battery, which in my opinion just simply isn't good enough, right? They say it should last a decent amount of time, but that's like a third less than the Galaxy S23 Ultra, and it's a thousand, more than 1,000 milliampere hours less than the Galaxy S23 Plus, which is what I would say is like the main competition here. Like 6.7 inch screen, not quite the latest specs, pricing around $1,000. And then on the back, and this is where it gets absolutely insane to me, a 12 megapixel primary into 12 megapixel ultra wide, which are set as part of the external display. That, to me, is crazy. We're still sticking with, again, the reason why the iPhone, like something like the iPhone 13 Pro, right? The reason why it could get away with a 12 megapixel camera was because Apple was using high-end 12 megapixel cameras. Apple liked the lower resolution so that they could have like just disproportionately larger pixels. They could reduce some of the computational load and just make the chip do double, triple the work on each pixel. The problem with a 12 megapixel primary is not the fact that it's a 12 megapixel sensor, it's the fact that it's an old 12 megapixel sensor, because Samsung is not like buying up or producing new high-end 12 megapixel sensors that are competing with like the latest 50 megapixel sensors or like Samsung's 200 megapixel sensors. The 12 megapixel primary here is a joke because it's now been like reused for years and years, and I will be covering like if there are like ever more news on that issue. But that seems to be the case, that it's yet like I've had a friend who wanted to buy a Z Flip 4, which was interesting because the Z Flip 4 had the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 Plus, which in Germany meant it was like a really good Samsung in comparison to most Samsungs that we are getting here with the Exynos chips, which that's why it changed, because people weren't really running out in droves to buy devices that would overheat, have less battery life than their US counterparts, have worse internet connectivity than their US counterparts, have worse graphics performance than their US counterparts. So this is why they fully changed to the latest Snapdragon. And that it's nice because we are seeing now logical continuation of the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 over the 8 Gen 1 Plus. However, you have to now consider, so we do have a logical evolution of like the outer screen, right? It's now bigger. We have a logical evolution of the processor. So why aren't we getting newer cameras, at least at some point? Like, you can tell me a lot about like size constraints, but you cannot tell me that like you couldn't just at least like make them like 10% bigger or something like that. Use like the second to last like 50 megapixel sensor that you had. Do anything. Like the friend that I was mentioning who was thinking about buying this Z or Z Flip 4, depends British, American, English, I usually fluctuate between those. It's like, so what do you do now, right? She was looking at it and like, oh, it was a reused sensor like already last year, and like the Z Flip 3 wasn't even that great. So now we'll be working with the same old shit on the Z Flip 5. Like, does anybody understand just how disappointing that is to an actual consumer? Like, especially if it's priced at the same $1,000, which I very much believe it will be with now the larger outer screen. And from what I understand, the latest Snapdragons are a little more expensive to buy for manufacturers. So I really don't get it how this was basically like not approved, but like, come on, Samsung changes up shit all the time for no reason. Like their camera arrangements have changed over the time like a dozen times. Like the A series has like random cameras all the time. Like sometimes that are like high resolution that some higher end phones because it uses like a random sensor that they found somewhere, right? So why not give the Flip at least some of that? Like, I understand, so it would cut further into the battery, or like you have to deal with that, Samsung, right? Make the device like a millimeter thicker for the same battery capacity with the same camera. Like, you found the space to make that screen that much larger, which means that obviously you are taking up some of the internal space. Like, the screen is a little thicker. It's not much, I understand, but it's like also extra power consumption. So it's kind of the problem here, right? Because you have a device that, I'm not saying cameras are everything, but like part of the appeal is like, you can use the back camera for like great selfies, right? Because you have an external screen where you can see yourself while taking a selfie. But like, if you're using such old like external camera, like I probably would rather use like a pixel level like selfie camera than this bullshit in the back. And like, I'm sorry, but like, I'll just Z Flip 4 versus Z Flip 5. Wonder if there's like an official breakdown of like even the ultra wide, if there are like even any major changes here. Yeah, allow ads. Oh my god, I hate, how do I turn off ads here? Yeah, pause on this side. Okay, good. Okay, I'm sorry. So, design and build, yeah, we know. The water resistance IPX8, okay, that's nothing. Displays, yeah, they're also talking about like the external screen, the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. When it comes to battery, the Galaxy Z Flip 4 has a 37 milliampere hour battery and supports 25 watt charging. So that's pretty much the same thing. Yeah, okay, was there like a potential for it to use like the Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 2? I don't know, to be quite honest, I don't know. Like, Samsung might be using like just their own like 8 Gen 2, which was like slightly overclocked, but they won't be able to sustain those high clocks, so it's hard to say. So, okay, so we don't have fully like confirmed specs here. So I'm using a somewhat like flimsy reporting here. From when is this actually? No, it's June 26th, so it's okay. Okay, so the colors are here. I don't care, to be honest. The devices are just not interesting enough for me. And finally, the Fold. Where are the Fold specs? And I should really like retune my Logitech mouse. So as for the Z Fold 5 specs, they get a little more intense. Both display sizes hit the same size as the previous generation. And this is where I would actually like Pixel Fold external screen. Let's just look at the images. Right, like look at this. Like, it's a nice screen, right? It's closer to the regular aspect ratios that we have, like somewhere in the realm of like 20:9 or something like that. And then you look at this, and it's this TV remote like aspect ratio that's like, it's so weird. Which is like, I don't want to be like super negative, but like, you could have just made the device a little bit wider. This is a productivity focused device anyway, right? So why don't you basically make it like 3% wider in this area, like try to cut down a little bit on bezels further, right? And then you will have both a larger internal screen and a larger external screen. And so suddenly you have a device that is doubly more interesting. I have no idea. Like, this is when people were talking in previous generations about like and I mean like phone generations, that like the iPhone was like reusing designs, that Apple was like cheap. Like, how long has Samsung been stuck with this design? I know that they've technically like made some of the internal bezels smaller. Like, this is the definition of like S-year updates, but without some of the love that historically Apple gave to like S generation updates. I have no idea how they expect to sell a lot of those without any changes. So it's 12 gigs of RAM, 256 or 512 gigs of storage. Good. So I kind of would have at $1,800. I kind of would like for them, especially from Samsung, who like can control their own storage. I would just like, for simplicity's sake, and I think it would also be better long term for Samsung logistic, to just have 512 gigabyte versions. Like, I know a lot of people will be fine with 256, but I just have to say, like, overall, like, those $150 that, or even $200 that you are charging for it, it's just not worth it. Like, just produce 3 models in different colors, all with like the same storage amount, all with the same chip, the same modems, ship as many of them throughout the world, and just be done with it. So the battery inside is a 4400 mAh unit, so it's the same over the Fold 4. It will come with a main 50 megapixel and a 12 megapixel ultra wide. The telephoto lens paired with the other two is also 12 megapixel. So it will come in at 13.4 millimeter tall, which is thinner than the Z Fold 4. Guys, you need a larger battery. You have like a 7-inch screen internally. Like, get it in your head. You need like 4800 milliampere hours for solid all-day battery life to actually maximize a little bit of that Snapdragon processor. Don't get cocky. Don't be like, oh, people want it to be thinner. Like, okay, it's 10 grams lighter, which I like. It's impressive that they made it lighter while maintaining the same, like, battery capacity. But, like, so you couldn't have used, like, some extra internal space that you have clearly created because you now made it thinner, you made it lighter. So you still couldn't get, like, the 50, if the 50 megapixel main sensor is the same as last year, which, yes, it's like an update, because I believe it previously was using 12 before the Z Fold 4. It's like, come on, like, just keep giving us newer specs. I'm pretty sure, like, the ultrawide and the telephoto are, like, stuck in the dark ages. But, oh my god, I have no idea why this is, like, the way they're going about this. I have no idea. Yeah, this is... I was going to be like high energy, but I'm actually disappointed by what I'm seeing. So, let's just see if they have any new reporting. So they're ready. So the Pixel Watch is like getting this. Okay, so you can get like a reservation for $50 credit. There was some rumors about like... Tensor D5 coming 2025 from... Okay, I will not be reacting to like any random rumor here, but... Okay, so... Where was like the Pixel Watch rumors? Pixel Watch 6. It's not a Pixel Watch. I'm sorry. It's the Galaxy Watch. So yeah, it's supposed to be like the classic. Is there any new info here? So yeah, there's supposedly some leaks about it. It will come in like 40 millimeters, 44. And then the classic will be 43 and 47. prices will start from 319 euro and go as high as 499, which is good. I don't think that's bad. Kind of always wonder why Samsung even makes phones, watches without LTE anymore. But okay, so there are like new Samsung Exynos 9 W930 will power the Galaxy Watch 6 series. It's from like a little less than a month ago. The name is spotted in certification on the Bluetooth database. It will be used on built on the same 5nm process as the W920, and it's okay. That doesn't okay. So it's just a slightly. I wouldn't be surprised if that's like just a better bint version. What was the the W980 supposed to be? That was supposed to be like 10% faster. Okay, so I have no idea how important that actually will be. Still, like that bezel, if at least it can move, right? If it's like that rotating bezel from Samsung, I'm fine. But it's such a large bezel. It's still better than the Pixel Watch, which I think is absolutely atrocious. But like, look at this. You could be using all of that extra space. Like, you could be programming like the software to be like super responsive to like swipe gestures here, but I have to say, like, Samsung throughout this year, like last year when they were finally changing up like their processors in Europe, I was really positive on that. This year, no wonder like half my friends who were in Android now fully switched to iOS. Like, yes, iPhones are ridiculously expensive here, but anybody who like really wanted like a full experience with like a smartwatch and great earbuds, they were like, oh my god, that update schedule from Samsung and stuff is like so sporadic and weird. Again, my friends are also tech nerds, so they actually know about everything, and they were like, good, if you help us set shit up, if you can like recommend apps and everything. None of them were using even like many features like on-screen multitasking on phones. So yeah, basically some of them are interesting in like foldables now that I see like the Pixel Fold, and some are sticking with something like the Flip because they just like the form factor. But overall, I have to say it's just not for me. And everything that I'm seeing here, it just doesn't change my opinion. I will be reacting live. I will be seeing if it's true, but yeah, it's just not my cup of tea. So I want to end this video, not YouTube Studio. Thank you for not even letting me type what I want to type. Yeah, so I do have. Oh, we have one active watch. That's nice. And that is, I wanted to react to MKBHD, which is...
Hey, what's up, MKB?
No. So videos. So yeah, he made like a Pixel Fold review. I'll quickly get my AirPods. So it automatically switched to my iPad. That's why I will try to connect them to the AirPods. Okay. Okay, I can hear it, and now I'll just make sure that you can hear it too. So now it should be working.
Hey, what's up? MKBHD here. Yo, the Pixel Fold is a weird phone. There are so many...
Okay, for some reason the sound isn't coming through.
holding and have been using and testing this phone. I've been
Okay, so I really wanted to make this reaction
MKBHD here. Yo, the Pixel
because I
Fold
really
is a-
wanted to make sure to let you know what I think of foldables. And I know, I hope it really works. Otherwise I will have to like delete the video or something. But okay, 1440p is enough. So I'll just see if
weird phone. There are so many things about this thing that are unusual. So I and many other people have been waiting for a folding Pixel. This is something we imagined was coming eventually, so it is kind of surreal to actually be holding and have been using and testing this phone. I've been using it for about a week now, and boy do I have a lot of thoughts. So I guess let's just start with the design. I really like a lot of the decisions they've made with this foldable, which really optimize far towards it.
Okay, good. It seems to be working.
Passport shaped. Originally, when I first got to play with it, I was saying, man, this could be the best foldable to use while closed.
Okay, that I agree with. Now, the reason why I really wanted to react to that is because, in my opinion, the Pixel Fold solves one problem, which is it makes the external screen much more usable. I think that the super tall aspect ratio really like f's up a little bit of muscle memory in comparison to a traditional phone. I think it just makes some text too small unless you like make it artificially large, and then you end up scrolling more than you would need to. But I have to say, like, now the problem is now you have to invest into a high quality big external screen that matches like specifications in terms of 120 hertz, so high refresh rate in general, Dolby Vision, etc. When you remember like the early days of foldables, those outer screens were meant to be cheaper. They were meant to be more like that external screen on the Galaxy Flip. But here, it's now basically a flagship or like high-end mid-range device panel. So the idea that foldables will ever get cheaper while pursuing stuff like that just ain't gonna happen.
And I do now stand by that take. It's the easiest, best foldable to use when it's closed. But unfortunately, it does have a much lower ranking for using it while open. So the front screen is 5.8 inches diagonally. It's got these curved edges you can see, and it's actually fairly...
So yeah, which is technically like a smaller diagonal than on the Samsung, but it's a wider screen. For anybody who knows math, a squared plus b squared is equals c squared, right? It can technically have even like a smaller diagonal while still offering like a much more comfortable user experience.
Bezels all the way around. The rails all the way around the phone itself and the hinge are stainless steel.
Okay, so this is also something that we sort of covered now, which is that this is flat. And it's now supposed to be also flat on the Flip, on the Fold. It's still not quite perfect, I would say, in how it starts up here, but it fully closes on the other end, so that's interesting. But yeah, it's definitely better than it was on most foldables before.
And the whole thing is relatively thin. It's just bordering on a little bit thicker than the thickest normal phone you can get. I think the number is like 12 millimeters total. You can see there's no air gap in the middle. So honestly, yeah, I've spent a lot of time using the outside screen like a normal phone, and it's just the most reachable, usable outside screen of any folding phone. You unlock it with the fingerprint reader on the side, which is also the power button, and it's pretty quick. This is a 120 hertz OLED display that gets up to 1550 nits peak brightness, so it's plenty visible outside. It looks really good to me in most situations. I mean, I'm impressed. This is a premium outside display, which, I mean, I guess I should be for 18.
Yeah, and I think that's, for example, what Mr. Mobile sometimes fails to cover, which is, yes, that shit is supposed to be good if it's $1,800. Like, $1,800 is the price of, like, 1,800 euros is like the price of a 512 gigabyte iPhone here. That's including the sales tax, which in the US would mean you're probably closer to paying like $2,000 for an $1,800 device, depending obviously on where you live. However, now you have to consider like that iPhone. Right, you can argue like in regions here, and I've always said the iPhones here are super expensive. But when you buy the iPhone, you know that this is Apple's focus. It will be getting a lot of updates. Developers are making apps optimized for it. It has the latest camera from Apple. Right. For example, in my last video, I've been critical that the next iPhone will not be getting like a meaningful like sensor update. But then again, the iPhone 14 Pro already got a very major sensor improvement. So giving it 1 year where it's just like a processor side improvement, like the image signal processor and stuff, where it does all the work for camera improvements, I'm not angry about that for 1 year. And then you also have to consider that a camera arrangement is already so much more premium than any foldable. And then you also have to consider that like that camera bump is already so large that having 1 year where the camera bump doesn't get even much more larger is actually quite nice. And even then, it's supposed to be getting larger because of the periscope camera. So yeah, to have that on the Pixel, like nice features like a good screen, it's not like it wasn't optional. It had to be here.
But we'll get to the price a little bit later. The point is, though, I've always said the best foldables have to be usable as just a regular phone, too. And this one does accomplish that. Great. So then you open up the phone, and then that's when things start to get a little more weird. So you can't exactly open this phone with one hand.
Yeah, this is something that goes back to like MacBook versus most Windows laptops, where could you open it up with one hand? It's not really necessary on a laptop because you're going to use it with two hands anyway. And but because it's obviously the lid like closes magnetically, then it is a sign of good build if you can do it without like a ton of wobble, without moving the device back and forth. On a foldable, I would actually say it's not really optional if you can open it with one hand or not. Like, I understand the idea is like the outer screen is something that you would use two-handed. However, what if you're opening it up for something like a selfie with the back camera? So you would still want to use it with one hand. So I don't buy the idea that is optional either. And it's kind of like, this is why I always say like foldables have like some solutions, right? Like you can use like the back camera for selfies, for example, which will be higher quality. For example, I'm using the back camera on my iPhone to record this video of myself. But overall, I'm just not a big fan of like a setup like this.
Definitely tried. I kind of try this with every foldable. Some are easier than others. This one's pretty much a no-go. But once you get it open, when you're in there, you're greeted with an interior 7.6.
Okay, so look at this, guys. Like, I'm sorry. I don't want to be a hater, but this is really ridiculous. Like, okay, the bezels are large, and the bezels are also asymmetrical. And I understand that's because part of the hinge is like built into that bezel, and you cannot actually make it much smaller than the bezel. It also allows you to put in a real camera without like what Samsung did, like that under screen camera that is like half as good as a real camera. It doesn't matter. Like, I know it's a real camera, but and then this would also drive me insane. Like those asymmetrical bezels here, it's like, sure, I don't want them to be as thick as that one, but I kind of would like a device that has like bezels like this all around it. That would be kind of sick. That would still be a larger bezel, but it would be a very than on the Z Fold, I believe, but it would be a very aesthetically pleasing bezel.
6-inch folding AMOLED display, also 120 hertz and also plenty bright, up to 1450 nits. Really nice size. It's reminiscent of that Oppo Find N2 foldable. But there are a couple of things to note. Here's where some of the weird starts. So first of all, the crease is pretty average.
It's terrible. Like, I'm sorry. Like, yes, when you look at it, it directly up front, it sort of fades away for cameras. I have never had that experience when I used a foldable in real life, especially under somewhat intense lighting. Which, yes, sure, in the night I probably wouldn't notice it much, but when I look at this, even from like 2 angles apart, that already falls apart from. Yeah, this looks bad. I'm sorry, this doesn't look like an $1,800 device. That hinge doesn't look like an $1,800 device. That bezel doesn't look like an $1,800 device. Like, I know the hinge itself might be premium and stainless steel and everything, but seeing it right under your fingertips, like, that's not how mechanical parts are supposed to look in 2023. They're supposed to go away. They're supposed to become less intrusive.
But you can for sure see it if you're looking for it, and you can kind of feel it. But because it's through the middle of the screen, you aren't usually running your finger over it, unlike the vertically folding phones. So
yeah, again, the flips are absolutely terrible.
Not really a big deal. It's easy to disappear to your eyes as you just look at content and use it normally. But then there was just some talk about how it didn't seem like the phone fully unfolds to 180 degrees. And
I believe Jerry Fix Everything, or Jerry Rig Everything, I'm sorry, measured it, and he said that it's like 178 to 179 degrees instead of a full 180. Yeah, that kind of looks like a 2-degree deviation to me.
Well, I don't know. This hinge is really firm, so you can fold it up halfway or any angle you want really easily, which is awesome. But then when you fold it flat...
That was actually hilarious when Mr. Mobile was like...
Fold it up halfway or any
trying
angle
to,
really easily,
like... make this work almost like, oh, but I can type on this, sort of like a mini laptop. And I'm like, oh, dude, no, you are so much better off even with like an iPad mini. But like, you could get like the smallest tablet available, even like in the Android space, but I don't know how one can justify this. Like, it's $1,800, and the battery life isn't even good enough, right? If the battery life was good enough to last all day, regardless of what you do. So I'm basically talking about like a 2-day battery life, but like an enthusiast will like use it all day to like take photos with like that weird positioning, will type a little bit on like a super old school netbook, which this is way smaller and way less comfortable than any even netbook, will watch videos, even though like in this way it's basically just as much a video consumption device as any other phone. Doesn't really improve anything, and if you put like a video over the entire screen, then now you're also dealing with the crease. So but like even the battery life doesn't allow for all those use cases for a prolonged period of time, so it all basically becomes gimmicks,
which is awesome. But then when you fold it flat, visually it looks pretty flat, but
it doesn't look visually pretty flat. As somebody who like bent one of my old iPads a little, I don't actually remember which one, and it had like that ever so slight curve, and it was far less pronounced than this. This looks like 2 degrees or 3 even.
Put it on a table, since there's a camera bump, it becomes more clear as it's rocking back and forth. It's maybe like 1 or 2 degrees short of flat. It's kind of weird. I mean, you can force it to get to flat, or even a little bit past.
Yeah, that's what
doesn't feel good.
What did you want to say?
Anyway,
do with like an $1,800 device?
As you've probably seen by now, this phone does have a slightly bigger top and bottom bezel than some other folding phones. It is noticeable at first when you just look at the bezels. But again, it's one of those things where you start using the phone and it is easy to forget about. You know, I think a lot of videos are going to hold it up side by side.
I'm sorry. I know that there are like differences. This is, by the way, how Samsung's phones have like 6.2 inch external screens, while this says 5.8, while this being still more comfortable. This is like a super tall thing. Like, why doesn't Samsung like just make it a little bit more? Well, that would be too much, but like just a little bit wider, have like more space for internals. They can even make like the bezel a little larger to make sure that nothing breaks or anything, and then use like all the extra space for like a larger external screen, because apparently all foldable users, that's what they want. And you still would have a device that is so much more immersive than anything that Google is delivering.
Samsung Fold, and then it's like, oh yeah, clearly one of them has a dramatically thinner bezel, and it is.
I will
really
go a
noticeable.
little faster.
But just using the phone, it looks fine. And Google actually says that this was an intentional decision. So what they were saying is they were, again, biasing so much towards it being thin that for some of the hinge components, they moved them out and above and below the hinge instead of in that Z-axis space, so that it could be as thin as it is, but now you end up with a little bit of extra bezel above and below the screen. But it did allow them room to put in a real webcam or selfie camera instead of a under display one. But also, I think this is a little bit along the lines of Google. The Pixel has never really been all about pristine, super highly engineered, like amazing hardware. They've sort of flexed their strengths on the software side. And I think there's a little bit of that here too. Either way, you can check the box of IPX8 water resistance, which is nice. I do really like this satin finish on the back, which does a good job of minimizing fingerprints and looks pretty good. And the camera bump doesn't go all the way to the very edges to meet the rails of the phone. That would have been tough with the foldable, but I do still think they did a good job of maintaining the whole Pixel aesthetic. Performance is weirdly good.
Yeah, so I will actually positively call out Google on that one. Good job on making the G2, which is an atrocious chip by objective measures, feel fast. Now, a fast operating system doesn't actually mean that much, especially in like a launch day device. But given that we still have a ton of high-end devices that don't launch with that kind of user experience up front, I want to commend Google and say good job here.
It's really, really good. It's actually the best of any Pixel phone, even though it's using the same chip. It's the Tensor G2 from the Pixel 7 and 7 Pro. But it feels smoother and faster and more consistent than the Pixel 7 and 7 Pro. So, maybe it could be that 12 gigs of RAM that are in here. It also has 256 or 512 gigs of UFS 3.1 storage. But yeah, it's been butter the whole time. I am very happy to report. Now, it's still a Pixel, so I have to add the disclaimer that it might not stay this way. Pixels have a history of this accelerated aging, which is even more of a bummer when you pay this much for a phone, but I can't report on that until...
Hopefully it doesn't, but MKBHD, others have reported on this prior that like Pixel phones get like super slow and buggier over time. I hope that it doesn't happen, but obviously I cannot guarantee that.
The best I can do is tell you how it's acting now, and it is acting great. The other thing, though, that I'm kind of actually hoping changes over time is the battery life. Because the battery life in this week that I've been testing the phone has not been great. Usually, actually, I can kind of just throw away the first day or two of me testing this phone because it's still setting it up, still connecting everything and getting it working properly, and then I can start looking at the numbers. But basically every day since I first got this phone, I've kind of had the same experience, which is not that great. 4 hours of screen on time at the end of my day, which is not nearly as high as some of the flagships out there. It is a 4,800 milliamp hour battery, which is really good for a foldable, but not gigantic for a giant screen on the inside. So Pixels have this feature called adaptive battery, and sometimes they can get a little bit better over time. Depends on your use, depends on who you are. Your mileage may vary. But yeah, I would say this is like C++.
By the way, I'm sorry a little bit for like the cut off subtitles below. I have like my screen set to like a 1920 by 1080 sort of like a 16 by 9 aspect ratio, and that obviously cuts into the screen, and I wasn't going to change like my OBS recording to just like video recording. So yeah, what you're seeing basically here, like cut off subtitles, I will actually just cut them.
Plus battery life. And the more I think about it, I've been using a lot of the phone while closed, which means it's the smaller outside screen. And so if I had been using the larger inside screen even more, it would not have gone better. So yeah, C+ for battery. But I want to talk about the software experience here, because it is a Pixel after all, and there is one weird thing. So this was a very interesting phone to test because Google had to do a lot of software work, and I was excited to try all of it. Google's apps are all these beautiful tablet optimized apps now. They're so thoughtfully designed for the phone with this size screen. They all look normal on the outside screen, but on the inside, Google Drive has this nice slide out sidebar and multi-column view. Gmail's new multi-column view is great. The new weather app is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, so some kudos to Google to finally redesigning some of those apps for a more tablet-like experience. However, I have to say, why did it take so long, right? I'm getting a little low energy because I really got bummed out by like seeing the Z Flip stuff and Fold stuff. But like even here, it's like I don't want to be an Apple sheep, but like that stuff, like, I know the weather app has like been missing on the iPad for a long time, so you could argue that Apple was behind on that. But like the idea of like a multi-column view being like the basis for tablet app designs, right? It existed since like Apple showed off the Mail app on the original iPad, and that was a 10-inch screen. By the time like iPad OS came around the iOS 13 era, the iPad not only had a ton of optimized apps, but then Apple introduced some more functionality to apps, basically like more 3-column views and stuff like that. So that's on a very basic front. Obviously, there have been much more changes to iPad apps over time. But this idea that Google can now come in and say like, ooh, they've introduced like their tablets like at around the same time as the original iPad. I would say like when you like look back to like even like Android Honeycomb, which had like some nice tablet specific designs, now we suddenly need like redesigns once again. Also, I understand that this is like the first like Google foldable. Why was it like after 4 generations of Z folds and stuff like that, why wasn't there enough collaboration with Samsung to design this stuff? Because at every point in like the foldable existence, Google has said, oh, we're working very close with our partners to make sure everything works fine. So why are we at this stage now? Why do we need those kind of changes now, and why haven't we gotten them at least 3 years ago?
Google Calendar is completely redesigned. Like, there's just so much good stuff. And then the new dock sort of ties it all together. So this dock I talked about on the Pixel tablet, you swipe up slightly from the bottom, and the home bar turns into your home screen dock. So this is the apps that you have on.
Yeah, the multitasking experience is like 90% copied from Apple. I'm fine with that. They've done the same thing when the iPhone 10 launched. And then, I don't remember which Pixel it was, but like around the Pixel 3, we were having then like those discussions of like, oh, which multitasking is the better one, and then it basically resulted in like Google one-to-one copying Apple. In this case, the actual like dock is comprised of like recently used and like currently opened apps, I believe, while on the iPad it's static, plus it has like all your apps, plus it has like a space for like 3 recently opens and stuff. So I would like something from Apple that shows all your open stuff, but primarily I do still prefer how Apple is doing it, because it's also more similar to how macOS does it, and even how like to a degree how Windows does it. But then Windows does show the currently opened ones app down in the dock, but that dock also like has changed like crazy like recently. So
on the bottom of your home screen, and you can quickly switch between these apps or launch into multitasking super
wait,
easily.
was it like
so just bottom of your home screen?
Okay, so yeah, that's even like the same drag and drop gesture for like opening a second app. Also, like Google, like just for like smaller understandings of UI, why are you doing this with like the split design? Why are you like rounding off the corner of like one app here while still keeping it white in the middle? Like, you understand that rounded corners are for rounded apps. It's okay when you're like swiping off, like make those apps look rounded, but when they're sitting side by side, they shouldn't be rounded off on this in the middle. Like, again, this is just such a simple oversight that
between these apps or launch into multitasking super easily. So just like the other folding phones, I feel like a multitasking god when I'm using this huge folding phone open and just typing away. But here is the weird part. As far as I can remember, every other foldable phone allows you to set up the home screens and stuff on the outside screen, and then the inside screen is separate. You can have a separate set of widgets. You can go crazy and make a different layout on the inside here. And on this phone, you cannot do that. So look, right now my outside screen is these 3 pages. This one with the icons and the weather, and then this calendar widget one, and then this third one. So when I open up the phone, that's exactly mirrored here. The left one is the first home screen, then the right one is the second one, and I swipe over, and here's the third one. But if I like take this raindrop icon and move it over here, and then when I go back to closed, it's also moved the raindrop icon there because
Yeah, I honestly think that that's how it should work by default. Should there maybe be an option to change that, where you basically have like almost like three screens, right? Like the outer screen, one half of the screen there, and one half of the screen there. Yeah, I can kind of see that as an option. However, I like the idea that if you turn it around, right, if you basically unfold it, that this screen basically like changes its projection from the outer screen to the left part of the inner screen.
it's keeping them exactly mirrored at all times, which is fine. I think that actually makes a lot of sense, especially for beginners. Like I bet if Apple made a folding iPhone right now, they would do the exact same thing, because iPhone users are used to not having a ton of customization on their home screens. But
which is like, I know that iPhone users were not used to, like, and you can still say like, oh, you can still put like not put your app onto any part of the screen that you want. But like, let's go back to like his setup here. Like, what about the setup? Look, okay, so the search bar, that's part of Google's UI. Spotlight search is very easy to access, so you don't need that on the iPhone. I do like having like a software like Google image search, like it's not image search, it's like searching through an image and stuff like that, image recognition. I do like that. You can actually have that as a widget on the iPhone. Then you have like app suggestions or a sort of dock. Again, you can have actually Siri suggestions on that screen. Did my camera turn off? No. It seems to work.
it's keeping them exactly mirrored at all times.
Okay, I just got a random message that like my like I should lock my iPhone. But once again, those are beta versions, so it's hard to predict. Yeah, and it seems to be working fine. So, oh, you got a full body shot of me looking at the screen. It doesn't matter.
It's fine. I think that actually makes a lot of sense, especially for beginners. Like I bet if Apple made a folding iPhone right now, they would do the exact same thing, because iPhone users are used to not having a ton of customization on their home screens. But I haven't found a way to unlock that at all. Like there's no.
Okay, so I like that criticism, which is like it should be an option. I think it works fine by default, but yeah.
In any home screen
so what I wanted to say, it's like when it comes to customization, right? Like look at this setup, right? Like those 5 randomly put on here, and like I understand the raindrop thing was supposed to be like random. I don't care how you define customization. That's not the kind of customization I want. Yes, there might be a case where I would want like the Twitter app to be always down there. So, but then again, the iPhone does have a permanent 4-app dock. And then you also have everything from like the double and triple tap back gestures for customization. So I really don't see it as big of a problem to not have like icons anywhere you want on the screen. But everything else, right, when you consider like what kind of widgets the iPhone now has, I don't think that and now when you consider like everything in terms of lock screen customizations, yes, I do think Android offers more customization, but I honestly believe that nowadays iOS offers better customization.
It's keeping them exactly mirrored. There's no, I haven't seen any home screen setting, or it just feels kind of un-Android-like to me. Like I feel like I can't be the only one who's spending $1,800 on a first-gen folding phone who would like to have some apps on the outside screen and then like a bunch of widgets on the inside screen. You know, you actually can't even span the middle with one widget because it's treating them basically
Yeah, that's how it should be. I fully believe that nothing should be on that crease. That
has
crease
two
is
separate home
ugly.
screens, even though it's all with one big folding screen. I just found that so weird. So anyway, aside from that,
Can you also imagine like tapping on that Tesla button, which sits right where the
I really
crease
enjoyed
is?
using the Pixel Fold. Seriously, between the great performance and the Google software, all the Pixel stuff, Google Assistant, call screening, etc., it's really easy to get past the weirdness. The other thing you typically expect out of a Pixel, though, is good cameras. So let's talk about this camera situation for a little bit, because, as I've said, everywhere you look, there's just a little bit of weird. So first of all, actually, there are 5 cameras on this phone. There is the 9-megapixel hole punch camera on the front, on the outside screen. Then there's an 8-megapixel camera on the inside, up in that bezel. Then there's the 3 primary cameras on the back. The thing with these back cameras is, because of how thin the phone is, there's definitely not enough room to physically fit the same size sensors and optics that you have in the flagship Pixel phone. So there is all new stuff here, and it's a little bit smaller. So there's a 48-megapixel main camera, a 10-megapixel ultra-wide, and a 10-megapixel 5x telephoto. Pixel Fold photos feel a lot like Pixel 7a photos, which isn't an insult. That's just to say that they're in the same style, the same contrasty Pixel style, but overall are definitely a step down in quality from the flagships. They're a bit noisier, a bit more muted in the colors, especially with the ultra-wide, and it takes a bit longer to gather the same amount of light as the larger flagship sensors. Also, if you want to see video from the Pixel Fold, I actually shot the entire last autofocus video on the Pixel Fold, so you can clearly see it's a step down from some of the other flagships I've shot with. There's a lot of noise in the darker areas of the frame. But I will say it was definitely easier to shoot with because it's a folding phone, so I can just unfold it and I see the viewfinder and I can frame things up with the primary camera. So that's an advantage. But yeah.
Okay, so I wanted to really let him speak. In my opinion, I do think the state of foldables is understandable when it comes to cameras because, yes, there are limits to how much they can fit. Because there's a limit to how thick they can get, and that limits in return to just how thick or not the external camera basically can be, the extra bump. So it is a pretty substantial bump, so I will not be criticizing them for that. However, it is a shame to me that you cannot go much better than like the Pixel 7a. Which honestly nowadays, like there were days where like the A series was like really close to like the Pixel flagship. That is not the case anymore. And like MaxTech even like tested out like the zoom camera, and they found that like software zoom on like the 14 Pro was like better than that 5x camera. It might actually have been the case that it was just relying on like zooming in on the main sensor. So yeah, it's a shame. I will not be like dunking on them for this forever, but overall I'm just not happy with that setup.
Movies on this thing. I mean, Samsung has had to deal with the same type of thing. Like the camera quality of their super expensive foldable phones has
like the fold, like the Galaxy Fold. I hate that they both call the Fold, but the Fold's so much prettier. I still think with the colors and like the full internal screen, and even if like that aspect ratio is like worse for usage, I think it looks cool.
Always been a slight step down from their big flagship.
The problem though is like the flagships have continued to evolve while the foldable devices have actually stagnated. So while the foldables used to be like a gen or 2 behind, now we are 3 gen behind, I would argue, behind the latest flagships. Some might say, oh, but the 7a, yeah, but the 7a wasn't like better than the Pixel 6. And the Pixel 5, granted, wasn't like that great, but that was a result because the Pixel 5 was like reusing like ancient tech by that point and trying to salvage it with software, which granted it did somewhat, but like when you actually look at like competing with like the Galaxy S22 Ultra, the S21 Ultra, that's where like the Fold 4, I would still pick like an S20. Likely at the end of the day, when the Fold 5 launches, it will probably have a worse main camera than the S21 Ultra, and I think that's a shame.
Slab style phones. So I think that's a fair comparison. This is a step, it's a notch down from the Pixel flagship cameras. You know what's fun? This is technically a first gen device, right? This is the first.
I hate this excuse. Yes, it's a first gen Google stuff, but like, how much Google stuff has to be like super disappointing at first gen, right? The Pixel Watch is bad. It has like a super small screen with like super large bezels. It has like bad battery life. Why does like Google is launching like devices like 6-7 years into the existence of something, like with the Galaxy Watch? Yeah, it's pretty much like 8 years. With the Pixel Fold, it's like, okay, it's like 5 years. And then you look at even like their tablets that they used to have, something like the Pixel Slate, and then you look at something like their Pixel laptops. Like, why was every first generation bad? And some might say, well, it's a first gen device. The problem is, if you make a bad first gen device, and yes, some will argue that this isn't bad in the same sense as like a Pixel Slate was by using like terrible Intel chips, but if you don't manage to sell your first gen device, then now you open yourself up to questions of like, how much money should you even invest into the research and development for second generation? If you don't have enough people actually using it, then the question arises, well, what are the legitimate use cases that people really want to see improved? Will people live with like a slightly worse battery in order to get much better cameras, or vice versa, right? How do people react to like a tablet in this in this day and age, I'm sorry, that doesn't have any kind of like stylus support? Why is all of this compounding? Because some people will say, oh, it's all a first gen device, and then we get something like the Pixel tablet, which yes is technically a first gen device for their like pseudo like Google Home like Nest Hub tablet hybrid. But when it comes to actual Google tablets, when you go back to something like the Nexus 7, I think it misses the mark more for what a tablet is than those devices did back in the day. Because at least they were innovators back in the day. At least they were trying something different from the iPad, which was meaningful to me. Because at that time, I actually, originally, I wasn't as big a fan of iPads. Until like, I would say like it took me really until like the iPad Air, where really started loving iPads. But I used like the original iPad and the iPad 2. What was interesting at that time is that you legitimately had like innovative like slightly different form factors. Some were like trying to be powerful for back in the day, some were like really portable. It wasn't much, but at least they were all trying something. And now it's like, oh, we're basically giving up on the core idea that the tablet by itself is good. So here is like a speaker you connect it to make it like a home device. And next year, Apple will probably give like the standby mode to iPad OS, which will be better likely because the iPad already has like amazing speakers. If you're looking at something like the iPad Pro, and even the iPad Air has very good speakers. So that was a long rant to say like those first gen excuses, they forget the fact that Google has been in the hardware market for quite a while, and them missing the mark repeatedly means that they are probably like restarting their internal development efforts. They are not building on top of the legacy of previous devices. If Apple were like to launch Vision Pro, and Vision Pro had like terrible internal speakers, because it's like a different form factor for speakers, right? They're supposed to be like computational around you and spatial and everything else like it, and people would be like, oh, but they're still like small speakers and pretty bad. I would be angry as hell at Apple, because some would be like, oh, but it's a first gen device. Yes, but it's not a first generation speaker for Apple to build. That's where I'm coming from. It's just like saying, oh, the Android apps aren't ready here. Like, my God, Android tablet apps have existed for like 12 years. Like, the fact that it's still the vast majority, even including some Google apps like YouTube Studio, isn't optimized. Like, there is like an optimized iPad app. How do you not have an Android app for YouTube Studio that works really properly?
Apple's ever made a foldable. And on one hand, you can kind of tell that they've at least learned some things from the other foldables already out there, because this feels a little bit better in some ways. Like, they've gone with this.
Like, how do you not go to like, because I understand Apple and Facebook hate each other, right? Apple is not going to go to Instagram and tell them, okay, let us help you with like the development of like an optimized app or something like that. But why is this not the case for Google, right? Like, they could like come in and say like, oh, look, Android now has one optimized apps that iPad OS doesn't have. Like, I miss like that work that's being put into like those changes and like form factors and trying to experiment with different functionality. And like a few years ago, like like Androids were like, oh, but at least they have like a file system. But it quickly became clear that that file system wasn't really helping you with all the other shortcomings of like Android versus Windows. So it left like iPads as the simple to use tablets that are limited, so people still want to have like a real productivity device. And then if you want a real productivity out of a tablet, we now have finally something like Luma Fusion on like Android tablets. At the same time, now that Apple is launching Final Cut Pro and Logic Pro on the iPad, so they're taking another leap here, while those are basically catching up to something that the iPads have had for years and years. So it's not just that, like, yes, Apple won the market share wars in tablets. Yes, Apple is the only one that is like legitimately interested in pushing tablets into higher stratospheres, because that means they can make them more expensive and make more money on it. They can sell more apps, more subscriptions on them if people use them more. Where is the same love from Google? Like, yes, they've changed their own apps, most of them, but like there should be like deep collaborations here that fix a lot of the shortcomings, and those should have been happening for 10 years. But because Google was like messing with Chrome OS and the Chromebooks, and like maybe all tablets should only work with like keyboards, and maybe we shouldn't have apps, maybe everything should work with Chrome. Like, yes, iPads are limited, but at least iPads have like stuck with their core philosophy from day one. They've had like major expansions to it, like keyboard and trackpad support. They've had like multitasking. But if you wanted to, you could still take even like the largest 12.9-inch iPad and use it in like just one big touchscreen friendly app right in front of you, even in something like Final Cut Pro. Right? That's where Apple's ethos is when it comes to tablets. And someone will be like, oh, this isn't about the tablet, this is the foldable. Yeah, guess what? This is a mini tablet, and it needs the love of a mini tablet to work well. And that is kind of why I feel that Android has repeatedly missed the mark to make the real like form factor innovation of the last 5 years. I'm completely fine with saying, like, when Samsung introduced like the original Fold, it was a disaster because it was breaking, yes, but it was a real innovation. And even like the folding screens, even with all their creases, even with all their use of plastic and ultra thin glass and everything that breaks faster and everything else like that, it still is something different and something that I think you could leverage for a legitimately new and fun experience. So I really don't get why we aren't getting that experience, because Google just now got off their ass to optimize a little bit of their OS and their apps for the Pixel Fold. What will we get if the Pixel Fold becomes a flop, right? Will Google stop those efforts? Will they never reach out to third-party developers? Because this is a chicken and an egg situation. You will not attract people to this form factor, even if it's the best foldable form factor. Like, objectively, I don't care if the Flip makes it easier to put into your tight jeans. like the Fold actually offers like more productivity. It will have better battery life when you just use the external screen, because you can just rely on like a large internal battery at least. It will have like even more space for cameras than the Flips. It will be a much better device. And yes, it will be more expensive than a regular flagship, and it will have some worse specs, but at least it will offer a cohesive new experience. And as long as that cohesiveness isn't there, then nothing is there. And it's not worth $1,800 without it. It's not even worth like $1,500 or $1,400 without it. And once you start considering that it's not even worth that much, then considering paying $1,800 for this basically becomes like, oh, you're ultra rich and you want a secondary device, or you are an enthusiast and want something to play around with, or, oh, I really just love any advantages this form factor gives, no matter how unfinished it still is.
Passport-sized form factor, and they've made conscious decisions to make it thin. And there's some hinge innovation here, and it's kept the pixel aesthetic. Just a lot of good choices that are impressive for a first-gen device. But it still clearly has some first-gen shortcomings also that have me thinking, well, maybe the next one will be better, you know? Like for the inside display, the crease and the bezels and the 178-degree almost flat fold.
Yeah, I will not comment on this anymore, because it's all, like, those things are not optional to me in, like, overlooking. Like, okay, the crease is bad. It's not better in any way than I would say even, like, the Fold. And the Fold is worse than, like, the Oppo Find N and something like that. But the Fold is also larger than most of those devices, so I can kind of get why there is some like design problem. The Fold has a bad crease on a device with larger bezels, on a device with like a hinge mechanism that isn't even like fully finished, in my opinion. If it doesn't go to 180 degrees, like why is all of this, like, those are not first gen issues, those are beta device issues. Like if this was an absolutely like first gen foldable, right, if this was like launching alongside like the original the original Galaxy Fold, maybe like alongside the original Galaxy Fold 2, maybe even alongside the Galaxy Fold 3, this is launching a year after the Galaxy Fold 4. This is basically 2 years too late to have any of those issues.
Like, maybe the next one will be better. For the weak battery life, like, yes, there is wireless charging, but hey, maybe the next one will have faster charging than the current max of 30 watts. And if
30 watts is fine for 4400 milliampere hours. If it can sustain that speed, that's all that matters.
Of course, the app situation is still, let's just say it's clearly imperfect. So they've done a lot of good stuff with their software, but some apps still look horrible. I mean, look at Instagram.
Yes, Instagram is bad everywhere. But yes, as I said, Apple is not gonna contact Facebook to fix that. Google should.
It looks terrible. You can double tap to the left or to the right to move it over closer to the side where it's more reachable. But still, I mean, that is rough.
Is that Twitter?
Also looks horrible.
Wait, Twitter doesn't have a fully optimized like Android app? Oh my god, no wonder like all those Twitter clients, like the tweet bots and stuff like that, were so popular. Like, I always wondered that, because I never had the problem with like the core Twitter experience on iOS. Oh my god, this is horrible.
Like 18 birdies, also not optimized.
Oh
Even
my
YouTube
god.
Studio is just not optimized for this big.
YouTube Studio is also something that like Linus complains about on like his Galaxy Fold.
Your screen. And the list goes on and on and on. Maybe that'll be better by the next one. So
yeah, but this will be better by the next one, maybe, right? So at that point, you shouldn't even consider this one, because for example, I bought the M1 Max MacBook Pro. This was a year after the original M1 devices, so there were actually a lot of apps that already got updates that were supporting like Apple Silicon. Plus, it was just a much nicer device than those ones. And over the last year, it continued to get like nice updates, but the core experience was already very much polished when the original M1 M1 devices were coming out because they had like a good backwards compatibility and stuff like that. And by the time I got my MacBook, which was like a super large transition, it was basically perfect for my use cases. I don't use like 10-year-old apps or something like that on my MacBook. The Pixel Fold should be like basically an M1 moment, which is it does a lot of things right, but then a year later you will get something fantastic. However, like given the fact that we're just talking about like apps optimizing for like aspect ratios and stuff like that, and that this hasn't happened for 10 years, I am not very optimistic that it will happen now.
The thing about this phone is it is $1,800, so of course that prices out pretty much anyone.
What? And this is also a question. Why does it perfectly price match the Z Fold? Right? I understand that like that's probably like if you want to have any somewhat decent margin here, that's how much you need to charge. But like why doesn't it have like, why isn't it like 1,700, right? And somebody will like, oh, if it were 1,700, you would be asking why isn't it 1,600? No, my question is like, why isn't it at least a little cheaper? Because the Fold 5 is around the corner. Those devices support styli. They like cameras are a little bit of a wash between them. Like the Samsung like experience, I would say, is just much nicer with like the large internal screen. Obviously, Samsung actually has more leverage when it comes to pricing because they control like the display production. Though Samsung Mobile is somewhat different from Samsung Display. That's why Apple has actually a pretty decent relationship with Samsung Display, while they can hate and vice versa. Samsung Mobile can hate them in return. But that's another discussion for antitrust agencies and how Samsung is structured in South Korea.
Who's just gonna like walk into a store casually and just get a normal upgrade for their phone. It will be relegated to the early adopters, the enthusiasts, maybe people watching this video, and the Pixel fans. It's a smaller group. But also, I gotta say, weirdly enough, I really like using this phone.
Yeah, and this is where I think that like where MKBHD falls a little short, not because it's obviously his opinion, right? But he says he really likes using it. My question is here, is it nothing in the review would justify the really? And I know that sounds nitpicky, but like what he described as a device that I would like describe as something he likes. Maybe even as something he enjoys to a degree. But something that he really likes?
I like love using this phone. It's got just the right set.
And now he's saying he loves it.
Of quirks and features that I like it over the regular Pixel, which I had been using. And also, I think it's specifically because it's so well optimized for using it closed. Like I keep talking about how it's the best foldable to use closed.
Yes, it's the best foldable to use folded. Use your $1,800 device to get a worse experience in every way than a regular flagship, for the rare like honor of sometimes unfolding it.
It's got the right set of strengths and weaknesses that I spend most of my time just enjoying using it like a normal phone closed, and then every once in a while, my 20, 30, 40% of the time that I open it up and use it, it's just this whole new world, and it's a nice benefit. It's getting closer to that ideal folding phone for me. I really like it. It's also Android 14 coming up soon. 5 years of promised security updates. Great haptics.
Yeah, this is also like, it's not 5 years of actual software updates, which I think is what Google might start promising next year. Or sometimes when they've like maybe it will take like when we saw like the G5 promised just now on 95 Google, maybe like at that point, but like they definitely do not believe in like the G2 to offer like full 5 years of like big OS updates.
I really like it. I'm sure I'm looking forward to the next one still, of course. But for anyone else who's going to jump in on this first gen version, just know what you're getting into. It's a weird one, but I like it. Also, you might have spotted a few designs from channel sponsor Dbrand a few times in this video. This new one, it's called Robot City, and I think it's pretty sick. It's
yeah, I don't. Sorry.
It helps a lot also on a phone that's
okay. So we are done here, and so yes, I know I haven't like covered as much here as I usually do. Okay, so we will be getting like an AMOLED display and an 11-inch tablet. Again, I will be reacting live to Samsung's event. I will probably maybe do another video on this if we get like some really solid leaks in between. But then again, we basically know everything there is to know. I will do more reaction videos in the future, something like what we just did with MKBHD. I really appreciate some of the support I have seen for like my reaction to SkillUp's review of Final Fantasy 16. I will be obviously going back to a lot more Apple content, but we don't actually have that many Apple news right now, so I will maybe try to cover a few other topics in between. Hopefully you still like it. We got a few new subscribers recently, and actually not from the Final Fantasy video. So I hope you all don't just unsubscribe the second you see that I'm not a gamer coverage guy here. But yeah, this is basically what I wanted to cover here, because I honestly didn't know that much. Like, that external screen was the most interesting thing we covered. That Pixel Fold video is something that I really wanted to break down with you in what I think about what the shortcomings of foldables are, and I hope my rants in between did a decent job with that. My streaming setup will stay similar to this one going forward. I'm not getting an extra external screen simply because I don't have much of a use case, and I will not be like, I've done a lot of it recently with like connecting to my TV, but since I will be showing my face from here on, I thought that this was unnecessary. Like, the camera setup would be a little weird. So regardless, you saw a little bit of my ass when I was standing up. I am in the process of losing weight. Anybody who follows me on Twitter know that I've been like working out like crazy. It's been a hard 2 years. Maybe I will cover that in some other video. Regardless, I'm really grateful to anybody who supports me, to anybody who views that content. I know now that basically all of you watch that content afterwards. We simply don't overlap with any of my fans in terms of like the times I'm streaming. Maybe now that I'm doing my streams at a better time for me, it will also be a better time for you. I've done those streams like at night. Previously, I will not be doing that anymore, so which technically was a good time for anybody who wanted to watch from the US. So we usually had like 2 or 3 viewers more. But yes, in this case, it's fine if it's just me talking for now. I know that as we keep getting new people, we'll be getting both more live viewers and more viewers afterwards. So I'm perfectly fine with how the channel is growing. Please let me know if you want me to change anything. I've seen throughout the video that like my camera was moving along. I'm sorry, that's because obviously the iPhone is heavy and it like is on the lid of the MacBook. So I've changed the setup midway through so it actually sits there comfortably. And now I know how to set all of this up for like decent sound quality and camera quality. So, but if there was anything you didn't like the video setup is something that I didn't plan for. That's why the aspect ratio of like the video coverage was a little weird, but I hope you still enjoyed it. I hope the audio mix was okay. Let me know here or on Twitter. This is MarkTech. This video is now 1.5 hours long. I plan to make it half an hour long. I'm very grateful once again, and I hope that we keep seeing each other in those videos. I plan to do one in the next 3 days, at least one video, maybe more. So please tune into that. I will, as always, let you know when the next live stream is coming. So thank you very much.